Have you ever sensed in your life that there was this unseen hand that was guiding you? Friend, I am so excited that you are here for this Simply Sarah episode. Welcome. It's going to be a great one. I want to welcome our audience to Susan Good. She is an incredible person with an amazing story. And Susan, I am just delighted that you are here with us today.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
This is already fun. I can feel all the good things going on. Tell me how you got to where you are today.
That's a good question. When you look back at your life, it's amazing where you start and where you end. And there has been a hand that's always been guiding me. I'm very grateful to be where I am. I'm in a good place. I live in a wonderful community and I have a great family. God is good.
Yes. So part of our story of when we started talking, we began kind of comparing notes and seeing how parallel our lives have been.
Yes.
I believe that you grew up overseas as well. You have this phenomenal blog, and I just want to put that up front for our listening audience that maybe they would be interested in reading along with your blog as well. That all of those things will be in the description for the show, but would love for you to share just a bit about this blog and all the different things, the different places that you've lived and the stories that you're sharing.
I am just so blessed. My father worked for Pan American Airways, and it's a long story how he and my mom met. My dad was a Holocaust survivor. My mom was a Catholic tourist. She decided she wasn't probably ever going to get married. She was 28. So she went on a trip of a lifetime. She met my dad in Ecuador, and to make a long story short, they married and went back to the U.S. for, I guess, the first 5 years of my life. And when I was 5, my dad was transferred to Barranquilla, Colombia, and that's where I did kindergarten. And it was kind of a shock because I was the only non-Colombian in the school. I didn't speak any Spanish. And they taught me to read and write first in Spanish and then later English. Yes. Unfortunately, they didn't teach me phonics right away. So I learned that later. But God has a sense of humor because later in life, I've taught English as a second language and taught phonics and all of that. Yes. We lived in Colombia for 4 years, and then my dad was transferred to Managua, Nicaragua, where I finished. I went there in the 5th grade and finished high school there right before the revolution.
Wow. So had you guys already packed up and moved before the revolution then, or did you still have a place there and that you guys were trying to figure out what to do with your items and things?
We were transferred to Puerto Rico, so we were in the process of moving, but the revolution had been going on for many years. So we got out at a good time. We got out I just finished high school, and then we moved to Puerto Rico, and I was trying to figure out where to go to college because it's hard when you grow up overseas and you haven't lived in the United States other than to visit. So I had decided to go to Mexico because I thought, well, that's close enough to Nicaragua. I can fly home, for the major holidays. Right. And that's where I started at Universidad de las Americas. And it was a wonderful international school. Mm-hmm. And then in March of that year, the Federales came in and declared the school to be communist, that the teachers were all communist, and they had their guns and said, you have to leave with only what you can carry out. So fortunately, with my dad being with Pan American Airways, I called my dad's secretary and she had a ticket waiting for me at the airport, but I had to get to the airport, I was in Cholula, which is about 2.5 hours from Mexico City, but I made it. And then later I'd say April, my dad went back with me and got my stuff out of the dorm.
Yes.
So
Wow. So as you were doing this drive to get to the airport, knowing that there was a ticket there waiting for you, were you taking public transportation then?
Yes, I rode a bus, and you sit next to the chickens,
Yeah.
and, I'm really lucky that I can speak Spanish, so that makes it much easier,
Yes.
but, I had no problems riding the bus. I got to Mexico City, and, there were a couple of other students that were leaving to Puerto Rico, so we all kinda grouped together and got to the airport and made it to San Juan, so,
So
um
then what did you do? So most of your first year then was done in Mexico. What did you then do later on for university?
Then my sophomore year, I wasn't sure what to do, so I decided to go to the university in Puerto Rico. I went to the Inter-American University in Puerto Rico for 1 year, and that was kind of difficult because, I'm trying to think how to word it, but for example, like I'd walk in the bathroom and then all of a sudden all the girls would stop talking and just stare at me. And then I was wanting to have a degree in international relations, and I was taking a class in international relations, and I was the only female in the class, and everybody was really nice to me till like we had the first grade, and then I got the highest grade, and then no one would talk to me anymore. So I was not happy there. So I set in place to go to, I had heard of a college called New College in Sarasota, Florida. And so I applied to go there and I got accepted. And it was a really great school, except it they had they had a lot of, I guess, hippies, and they would be dancing around palm trees, and I was never a hippie. I had never, I didn't grow up in the United States, so it was
Right.
kind of a it was just, and they were growing things that probably that were illegal. It just wasn't comfortable. So I transferred then to the University of South Florida in Tampa,
Yes.
and I did graduate. And the great thing is I graduated, I got my degree in 4.5 years. So I just had to go one extra semester. So
That's
I
amazing.
was very blessed, very lucky.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
met so many really great people on this journey.
Yes.
So
Absolutely incredible. One of the things that I know about you with this blog is that you have taken some journaling that you have done in the past and that you have added pictures and different things to. I would love for you to share because it's just such a delight to get an email saying Susan has another blog ready to read. So tell
I
us.
am having the best time writing this blog. In the last couple years since COVID, I've been taking classes on writing children's stories, and most of my stories come from growing up in Latin America and the different escapades that I've encountered growing up. And so one of my critique member friends suggested, she said, if you want to get an agent and if you want to get published, you have to do some social media. So she said, do a blog. And I'm like, what would I do a blog on? I don't have anything to write about. And that night, I dreamt about a journal that I had written. And so the next morning I got up and looked, and I found this whole bag of diaries that I had kept as a child and a teen. And the diary that was in my dream was on the top. So I pulled that one out, and it was just a really great, I mean, it was a year that a lot of things happened. So I started blogging using the diary, and it has been so great because I've reconnected with friends from the past. And I've gotten a lot of encouragement. And the most important thing is I'm having a great time looking for pictures to match what I'm writing about and just to see how my brain worked when I was 14.
Yes, yes. And for me, having been up overseas to see some of the parallel things, like we had an international continental hotel where we were
Yes.
in Congo, and then to see that you had one as well. I mean, they truly were international. I knew that, but just to see you had a postcard of one, right? How incredible.
Right. And that hotel was really cool. Managua, Nicaragua had so many cool things about it. But one of the cool things about that hotel was Howard Hughes had decided to live there. He was living there that year. And then after the earthquake in the end of the year in December, he quickly left and moved somewhere else, but he was on the 7th floor, so it was always a thing. Can we push the button on the elevator to go to the 7th floor? But it was blocked. So,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, you and I have a lot of correlations. We all went to, well, in Colombia, I went to a parochial school where no one spoke English except for me at the beginning. And then we did have classes. They taught us simultaneously Spanish, English, and French. But then when I moved to Nicaragua, I went to American Nicaraguan school, an international school, and that was really cool because there were people from all over the world, and we're in similar situations where they moved every few years or not.
Yeah, exactly. So you being multilingual, what language did you speak at home? Because your father was obviously multilingual. And I'm thinking that your mom, by this point, had also picked up some languages as she traveled and did different things.
We spoke English at home. My dad's native tongue was German, but he wanted us to be American. So he only spoke English. And then when we moved to Latin America, he would speak to us in Spanish too. But Mom understood Spanish, but she never really spoke it. I've taught Spanish and English, and it's much harder to learn as an adult. If you learn it as a child, it's secondhand. I mean, it's easy.
Yeah.
But Mom struggled with it, but she did understand it. So you couldn't slip things by her speaking in Spanish.
So you and your siblings couldn't be in the back seat speaking in Spanish to get around Mom on things.
We tried that. I'm very blessed. I had 2 siblings. Mom had us all. Since she at that time was considered older, she thought she's going to have her babies right away. So she had 3 of us in 3.5 years. And moving around, we were very close. And they're the best gift my parents ever gave me were my brother and my sister. They've been amazing.
Yes.
And still are.
I love that. So switching gears just a bit.
Sure.
I know that you are a double cancer survivor. And how were your siblings helpful in that process, as well as your husband and your sons? Why was that? How was that community so important for you as you've gone through these really amazing, you have just such an incredible story to share about this.
It's kind of ironic because I've always been very, into nutrition and exercise, but I'm grateful that in my family that I was the one that got, unfortunately, cancer because I'm tough.
Yes, you are, Susan.
So, the first time I was diagnosed was in 2016, and it came as a shock. I had just come back from a yoga class, and I felt I was getting ready to go to sleep, and I felt like a flutter across my stomach, and I was like, "Hey, I know I'm not pregnant." And you know how you feel that first? Felt like a butterfly, and so then I kind of pressed down, and I felt like a little tiny bump, and it wasn't on the other side, and so I called my doctor the next day, and I had a great doctor. He saw me that next day after school because I've been teaching. And he said, there is something. And so he ordered tests, and everything fell into place. I got the best oncologist. He was amazing. He grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, where my mom grew up, and he went to the male version of the parochial school she went to.
Yes.
And anyway, I was diagnosed with Non-Hodgkins Lymphoma, large B cell, which is a very aggressive cancer. It's a blood cancer. So I did 8 rounds of R-CHOP, which is you can't do more than that or it's lethal. So I did 8 of that. And then my oncologist wanted just to make sure everything looked clean, that he did 25 rounds of targeted radiation. So my family, my husband, Eric, was just amazing. I'm trying to think. My siblings were great. My sister's a nurse, and even though she lives way out west, as does my brother, they were in touch with me all the time. And her being a nurse, she helped guide me through everything. At that time, my mom was living here. It was a rough time because I was teaching ESL at the elementary school all day. And at night, I was teaching adult education 2 nights a week to the parents of my students, which I loved. As also my mom had moved here and she was like 88. So I was looking out for her. And then I had a teenage son at home and then one who had just started college. So it was just a stressful time. But one of the things I did is as a teenager, I remember reading The Diary of Anne Frank, and the part of losing her hair, that was just like, oh gosh, I couldn't deal with that. And then I find out that was the first question I asked the oncologist, am I going to lose my hair? And he goes, yes, in exactly 17 days. And
it was.
I did. But I decided that, I got to make this fun and I don't want people to treat me like a sick person. Right. And plus my son he was 15, I think. I wanted him to still have friends coming over. Yes. So I decided, well, I'm going to get some wigs. So I got some Party City wigs. I got this purple one that was amazing. I got all these wigs from Party City and I had a friend and she's a beautician and she cut them to my face. I mean, they were drop dead gorgeous wigs. And I can remember once I had my purple wig on. I was bald as you can be, but I had the purple wig on. This lady chased me in Costco and said, who does your hair? I love her. And I just laughed. So that made it fun. Every day I was like, okay, what do I want to wear today? Do I want to wear my purple wig? Do I want to wear my blue wig? Or do I want to wear my red? It just made it more fun. And I think I was very lucky on my church community, my school community, and then my family were just great. They helped me bring in food in because I was just, chemo really is hard. It just makes you don't feel good. But I would bring with me the treatment I had. The art chop would last 8 hours. It would be 8 a.m. till late afternoon. And then you go 3 weeks and you don't have any, by the time you're starting to feel good, it's time for another treatment. But I made myself get up and walk. The university here offered acupuncture, and acupuncture really helped me not have a lot of severe reactions, I believe, to chemo. Mm-hmm. Also, I would watch videos on TV of Carol Burnett and I Love Lucy because I never got to see those growing up. So I'd be in the room where you're doing your infusions and I'd be laughing and everybody would be looking at me, but I didn't care because you got to do what you got to do to make things the best that you can in whatever situation.
Yes.
Anyway, I made it 4.5 years. I'd gone to the doctor in December. It was 4.5 years. And they said that, if you can make it 5, you are cancer free. Well, then that was in December. And then in April, I felt a lump in my neck and I went right away. They did a antibiotic to see if it was an infection. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And this time I couldn't do art chop. There was very limited what I could do. So they said they wanted to do a stem cell transplant. And so I did. If you ever have to have a stem cell, it's a little painful, but they decided that I wasn't a candidate for that. So I was like devastated. What am I going to do? And then the next day I get a phone call directly from the doctor saying, they're opening up a study on CAR T-cell transplants and you would be a candidate. And so I had to go through this rigor testing to see if I could be a candidate. And unfortunately I was, and what a blessing. It's a hard process, and it happened during COVID because March was when COVID hit and then April is when I got the diagnosis. And so that was pretty scary. Yes. But then the good thing is there's always good things with bad things, is that everybody's taking precautions. Everybody's wearing masks. Right. So when I go to the hospital, it was safer probably than it was the first time. And I got my wigs back out. This time one of the nurses in the where I was doing the therapy, she gave me a blonde wig. So that was my Marilyn Monroe wig.
Yes.
And so my husband would tease that he never knew who he's coming home to. Anyway, you asked about how my children reacted. It was really hard for my son living here at the house, but he would still, we'd have band practice at my house. And the kids just, they kind of thought it was cool, I think, having the different color hair. And it was just, when I did the CAR-T, I had it done at Vanderbilt, and you had to live there 6 weeks.
Yes.
So that was hard, but my husband went online and found us a place that was close to the hospital. And it was right, the transplant was going to be in August. And so school started. My husband is also a teacher, and school was starting for him. So the first 2 weeks, my son, who had just graduated and had a new job, but he was working at home because of COVID, he came and stayed with me. So that was such a blessing. And I think when you have bad things like this happen, it brings people together, makes you closer. So,
yes.
Anyway.
In that space of you being at Vanderbilt for 6 weeks, were they watching you differently because this was a brand new procedure? What was that process? Because it truly is remarkable that you were within 24 hours that they called you, this unseen hand, right? That just continues to
Right.
That you were close enough that you could fill in all of the different things that you were a good candidate for it. What was that process like?
It was very, it all happened so fast, and it's almost like God put everything in place. When I was first diagnosed in 2016, CAR-T cell was very new, and it was just in the beginning, so it wasn't really an option for me. This time, I did qualify. I mean, they go through a rigorous test. You have to have an echogram to check your heart to make sure your heart is strong enough. They do a breathing. You have to go on this thing. It kind of looks like when you're in the airport, and nowadays you have to put your hands up. Well, this was a thing that measures your breathing, and it was really interesting. They did every test you can think of, and fortunately, I passed it. When I got there, one of the first things they do after they qualify you that you are a candidate and that you're strong enough is they do a thing. It looks like dialysis, because I would go with my dad when he had dialysis. I was in this room tiny room. It had just like a little tiny cot and a nurse with a computer. And once you were in it, you couldn't leave. And so for 5 hours, I had to have a special port put in. I called it like an octopus because it had 3 arms. They couldn't use the other one that I had. I've had so many ports, but this one was actually, it looked like an octopus to me. And they hook it up and they take your blood all out, and they're trying to they're separating your T cells. So for me, it was 5 hours, and you can't leave. And then if your lips start to tingle, they start popping Tums on you. And I'm not really sure. I don't know why they were doing that, but all of a sudden my lips were tingling. So they're just popping me Tums. So every time my lips would tingle, they'd give me another Tums. But it wasn't that painful. And I was very lucky that I could fill up the bag, because some people, I didn't even know this. So it's better not to know all the terrible things that can go wrong. I filled up the bag. And then they send this bag to California, and they separate your T cells, and they do some kind of magic, and some kind of, they genetically modify some of the T cells. And then after this took about a month, and then I went back home after I had those extracted. Then they called me within a month, and I had them put back in. And that's when they put the new T cells along with your old ones. And so I am genetically modified now. And
bionic.
So then once they put those in, those T cells go and they target all your B cells that have cancer in them. So it's just a miracle how it works. Then they admitted me to the intensive care, which I was in their intensive care area for at least 10 days, and they monitor you. I mean, every few hours they'd have you write, because there's a lot of really bad side effects you can get with when they put the T cells back in. But fortunately, I had very few. But they ask you these questions and you have to answer them correctly. And then you have a clock, and you have to fill out a clock. They'll say, okay, put down 12:20. And then as I'm doing this, I'm thinking, how are kids going to do this nowadays? Because kids don't know how to tell time. There's only like a 2-week thing in second grade that they can do. So, but I had to do that. And then they'd ask me a phrase and I'd have to repeat it. And that was like it felt like every 4 hours. Then they're taking blood every 4 to 6 hours out of you to make sure to see what your levels are. So that's why you have to stay in the hospital, and it's around the clock. So they wake you up at 1 a.m. and you have to write this, because they can tell if there's going to be any neurological problems by your writing.
Oh, got it.
So they're measuring your handwriting to what it was the previous time or the beginning, to make sure, because they want to catch things really quick, because then there's a remedy for them. I remember the first night that I was in there, and it was a nice room, and it's a pressurized room. And it was a male nurse, and he was very kind. And I'm like, I'm feeling really good. I don't need to be in this intensive care. And he goes, honey, you're really sick. I said, no, I'm not. He goes, yes, you are. But I'm trying to think what else. Oh, during the night, I start smelling like corn. I go, what is that awful smell? He goes, honey, that's you. The stuff that they preserve the T cells in is a corn mixture. And he says, very few people can ever smell it. And he says, you'll smell like that for a day or so. And I was like, okay. He said, normally people don't smell it, but other people can smell it. Yes. And he just laughed. But the nurses and the care there was amazing. The only thing in the morning is, since it's a educational hospital, they come in, since I was like the first patient since COVID. So they were I'd have a room full and they'd be asking me questions and stuff. But every morning I made myself get up, and put a little makeup on, put one of my wigs on, and I was ready when they'd come in. I also had I had a friend, because I was attached to all sorts of, I called it my friend. I asked if they had any art programs in the hospital, because I was like, this would be really, this would be a good time to do stuff. So they had an art therapist, and she came in and she brought me all these things that I could work on. And then also the Cancer Support Center in every city has one. And I highly recommend if you're ever going through anything of cancer, to contact them. They had online programs, so I could do art classes through them. I tried to do yoga. I brought my yoga mat, and I know they thought I was very strange, but I asked the doctors if I could do that, and he said, the team said that it was very important for my emotional health. So they had the nurses unplug me so I could do some of these things. So they were just very supportive. And the main side effect I had is I started running a fever. So I couldn't be released right away. And then once the fever abated, Eric found this really cool house. It was 4 blocks from the hospital. And I'm just very strong-willed, but I was like, I had to be at the hospital every morning, and then I had to be there again at night. And during the times that I wasn't there, I had to be able to be hooked up to the computer.
Yes.
So I would walk. My husband was like, the first time when my son first came up, he was like, he'd follow in the car, but I was insistent that I was going to walk. And it was hard, but I did walk. And then eventually my son would pick me up in the car, and if I wanted to, or he would walk with me. And so we all worked it out. And the house that we were staying in was like a mother-in-law's house connected to this old house that was over 100 years old. And the lady was phenomenal. And she was after I'd been there, I guess 2 weeks, she said, there's a farmer's market. Would you like to go? So I checked with my doctors, and they said, as long as you wore a mask and everything. So she took me to that, which was fun. And anyway, it went by. And she also had a koi garden in the back with koi fish. And so I could sit out there and watch. So it was just a really good time, in a good way to recover.
Yes. So you have been, over the last several years, working on writing children's stories about your escapades growing up in South America. Were you already working on that then, as you were recovering from this second round of cancer?
Well, I've always kept journals. And what got me started writing children's stories is when COVID hit in March, our school went online, and I had a lot of students. I was doing the lesson plans, but I had some students that were brand new to the country and didn't speak any English. So I was making videos of bilingual books, and I couldn't find that many. So I did about 20 recordings. And this is just a side note, but when I was at Vanderbilt, I was telling one of the nurses, and she said, oh, we have a studio. And she said, they would love to have your videos, and we could play them for the students, or not the students, the patients. So they took about, I'm trying to think. He was on the Kelly Ripa show. I forgot what his name is, but he has a studio at the hospital. So they took my videos and they were playing them for the patients that were in the children's section. But that's how I started, is like, I can write stories. I can do some better than these, because some of the stories that I was reading were pretty lame. Right. So that's what got me started. And then I quickly realized that, there's a lot I've always written, but there's a lot to children's stories. There's like, you have to be concise on your words. You want to keep it between 500 and 700 words. You don't want any extra words. And there's just a lot of things. So that's been really fun in my recovery, is taking classes. I signed up for a university in Nevada that I was taking classes with. Also critique members, getting in critique groups. So that's hard, but it's really good for you.
Yes.
So
I have somebody who, with my books, especially one of the books that she was editing, she had gone to Harvard to be trained how to be an excellent editor.
Wow.
And for me, it was like, okay, wait, I'm typing as I'm speaking, right? It's the same kind of linguistic kind of thing. And she's like, no, Sarah, you can't do it that way. This needs to be people who are reading the book. You need to get to the point. And so she's still on my shoulder talking to me when I'm writing about, you need to get to the point. I mean, it's great to add in all the other parts of it, but that's for me, the easier part in conversation, right? Is that you can add these pieces in a conversation. But you are, and then for children's books, the illustrations are so important. So finding the right match for you as you move forward in this process is also such an important piece. Are you thinking about one page will be in English and the other page in Spanish, or vice versa? Or are you going to do the full book in one language and then in the other language and have it be, back to back?
What I originally wanted to do it, one page English, one page Spanish, but I went to a children's book writing conference, and I talked to one of the editors for a publishing firm, and she said, that takes too many words. So what we recommend is you can do some Spanglish. So what I've done, I've written 4 books.
Yes.
And I have them in I have Spanish words mixed in, but then I have a glossary in the back with the words. And she said, if you get, a publishing company, if they really like your story, then they'll print it in Spanish and then one in English, just because of the word count.
Yes.
But it's been so much fun. I love writing these books. And I've written one that is about, my dad was Jewish. So when I was little and we still lived in the States, he would take us on Saturday to the synagogue. And then on Sunday, we'd go to the Catholic church. So I wrote one about taking my prized possession, which was my marbles. I had a beautiful little purse and I took them to the synagogue, and you can imagine what happened. So that one I titled Susie Loses Her Marbles.
That's so fun. So I would love for you to share with our audience a bit about that, living in a household where, dad is Jewish, mom was raised Catholic, and so many of our listeners are also people who have had not just one world religion or one way of looking at life through religious eyes in their life. And how did you navigate that as a kid?
I never really thought much about it because, mom took us they got married in the Catholic Church, so they had to promise to raise us Catholic. And mom was a devout Roman Catholic, so she took us to church every Sunday and all the holidays. And dad would go with us on Christmas Eve. He always did. And my dad would tell us, he goes, this is really kind of funny. There's a forest out there when you get up to heaven, and the Catholics are going in one door, the Jews are going in another door, and then the Episcopalians or Methodists are going, or the Baptists are going, and everybody thinks that theirs is the only religion, but it's all, it's all God. So I guess it wasn't and being that my dad was Jewish, the Jewish religion is carried through the mother. So
yes, exactly. And then also, did you celebrate Hanukkah then as well as doing the Christian traditional Christmas Eve and Christmas and maybe Advent in there?
We didn't when I was younger, but when after I had my children, my dad we'd go and visit him, and he always did the Hanukkah and with them, and he'd light the candles, the ceremony of lighting the candles every night. I think as he got older, he got more. When we moved overseas, there weren't synagogues for him to go to. So that made it more difficult, but I was just very lucky. And now I don't know that I declare myself any specific religion. I just think of myself as a Christian.
I understand that. And I think also going back to the Hanukkah, to the menorah, I've always found it so interesting that there is one candle, the shamash, that's the servant candle. And that one candle is the one that's used to light the other candles. And in our own lives, in so many different world religions, there's this concept of being a servant, right? Of listening to the needs that are around you, whether it happens to be somebody who is in medical crisis and needs to have meals that are brought in, meals that are frozen, that are left in the freezers for them to be able to use, or people needing to have rides to go someplace, or people needing to walk and have somebody follow them in a car, right? There are all these different needs that we as humans have. And this whole idea that in the spirit realm that we can be choosing to do it through this beautiful agape, this beautiful love of saying, I'm choosing to be a servant in this space for you. It's not that I can't do this, do something else, but I am choosing, making this deliberate choice to come and be part of your life, knowing that we are all interwoven.
We are.
Yes. So, and I think that part of the amazing part of this story for me, Susan, is that you and I just met just a few months ago.
No.
Been raving about you for years, and that's your son. I think it's Trevor, who has come over and helped my mom with technology and different things. And so even though we've met more recently, your family has been so impactful as we've all been living further away to come. And again, it's that weaving of community and looking out for each other and caring. And I just want to say as the full audience is listening in, I am deeply grateful for how your family has so deeply taken care of my mom and loved on her in the absence of my father since he's been gone more than 13 years. So thank you.
Oh, and your mom and your dad, I mean, they have been wonderful. We don't have any family here, so they have kind of adopted us. I can remember your dad taking my boys, they were probably 6 and 8. He had this big tractor, and he'd drive them around on it, and they just thought that was wonderful. And then your mom, my boys love her. She makes this special bundt cake that is so amazing. And I think that's how she used to pay Trevor.
I think so too.
But my boys have always loved your family. And your mom, when my mom was here, your mom would go visit her. And because when I was really sick the first time, people would say, "What can I do for you?" And I'm like, "Go visit my mom." Because some days I just didn't feel well enough. I tried to go see her every day, but she was living in independent living area. It was just hard.
Yeah.
But that was fun too, because when I'd go in and there was one, actually, he was my first doctor when I moved here. He was like, "Come here, let me see what color wig you have on." And he would show everybody. So
Yes.
It was a blessing. Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that you are sharing with us that even in the midst of uncertainty and hard, that you were looking for ways to make things fun and to make yourself and your story accessible to others rather than you were concerned for how others were feeling. You knew that how you were feeling about it emotionally and physically, but that you didn't want to have a bald head and make other people feel uncomfortable and potentially treating you as though you were sick. And so you took action, you chose agency in order to say, yes, this may be my lot for this particular point in life, but I am going to make the absolute best of this moving forward. And the part about losing hair, I remember my mom talking about when my dad had cancer and he was doing some experimental things. And in that process that he lost his hair, my dad's hair was jet black.
I remember.
Last, right? And that whole thing, and mom just feeling so, dad was like, just go ahead and shave it all off. Go for it, Eenie. And mom just feeling intensely that this was just such a difficult piece with that. So the hair piece really is a legit in that for so many people, because we look at people and we see them coming from far away. And I have friends of mine, I can tell you what mood they're in by how their hair is. Right?
Yeah.
And not everybody's like that, but some people really are. But we see the gestalt, the whole person.
Right.
They take in information when they're far away from us, or if we're on FaceTime or whatever. You start making maybe their judgments, and maybe it's just taking in the information to determine, where our friends are and how they're doing in that particular place and time. So I love that you thought ahead about this and thought, I'm going to make this fun, because then the doctors were even. So then all the people who were in the waiting room, whether they are the next patients or family of, are like, hey, let me think about how this feels and looks, and could this be something that we choose to do? Whether we choose Susan's way of doing it or a different way of doing it, we also have agency. And I think that for me, the times that I've been in the hospital, that's been the most difficult thing of, I can be very strong-willed about what I want to do and then what they are willing to allow me to do. Finding some common ground in those areas can definitely take some time on my part, and I try really hard to not wear out the medical personnel, because they're doing their best and they're keeping the rules, right? It's for everybody's good to be doing these things.
Yeah.
And I love that you asked about the art part of it, having somebody come in to bring things or help you, and then also the yoga mat. What an incredible idea to get permission ahead of time to have things that make you feel like you have the ability to do things, and maybe not be able to do all of them, but to be listening to your full being and moving in such ways that your body could know that you were still listening to how your body was feeling.
That's true. And I don't know what you call it, the little pole, but they gave me this mask that it was like a face, a blank one. And so I painted it on, and my husband's really good. He's an architect also. And he painted the eyes so they look like real. And then I took one of my wigs and put it on it, and we hooked it up to the thing that's hooked up to all your wires. And then
Yes.
I put one of my shirts on it. And every day I would make myself, when I was in the hospital, I'd walk around. I couldn't leave that area but I'd walk around, and each day I'd try to do an extra lap because I
Yes.
just felt like I needed to do something on my part. The
Yes.
doctors were doing everything on their part, and, I needed to do everything I could to get better.
Yes.
So,
So, Susan, are there still follow-ups on you because you're one of the first people that they took all of your blood out, took the T cells out, sent it to California, waited for a month for it to come back, and then you were there for 6 weeks on and off in different points in time for them to continue to check you twice daily.
right.
Are you still under their?
I am still under their umbrella, and I'm not the first one. I think they had been doing at Vanderbilt, they'd been doing it for at least the last 5 years.
Yeah.
They had been doing this, but they had stopped during COVID. Everything kind of shut down. So I was like the first one after
Got it.
COVID. But
Yes.
yes, I was coming originally every month, then every 3 months. I just went 2 weeks ago. I had a scan, and the PET scan lit up on my left side, on this side of my neck. And they were thinking it was probably just inflammation, but I have such a great doctor. He was like, well, I want you to go to ENT. They checked me in and out. He was all inside my mouth, manipulating, and they decided to wait and do another scan. And the other scan was done 2 weeks ago, and it has gotten much smaller. So they feel like it's just allergies or inflammation. So my next visit, I'm finally graduating till July of 2024. So I'm really excited. I'm at 3 years, 3 years and 2 months.
Yes, congratulations. That's such an incredible, incredible story. Absolutely amazing. And each part of this, you have been very present with yourself and your family as you have gone through each of these pieces. It hasn't been something that you've tried to hide away and,
Right.
that you've just said, this is where I am. And part of that, I think, is your personality. Part of it also is that you understand that others are watching you. And so because of that, you're looking for opportunities to share your story because people are listening in, and it makes a difference for them to be able to think about where they are, their loved ones as well. So thank you so much for that. So Susan, what's next? You have this incredible blog. It keeps us in stitches every single
I'm having fun with it.
yes.
And hopefully, I'll find an agent, because I don't feel comfortable self-publishing. I would like to get an agent, and it's kind of like catch-22. You got to have an agent to get a publisher, and to get a publisher, you need to have an agent, but it's going to happen. I know it will, but it's not on my time. We'll see when it is. And right now I'm having such a good time. I've reconnected. My best friend growing up is Missy, is Missy. And her sisters were having a reunion in Kentucky. I guess it's been 3 weeks ago, and I got invited to go meet up with them again. And I hadn't seen them in 20 years, and we had the best time. And the one sister's husband, his dad was my dad's best friend. So it was just so much, that door opened. If I hadn't started the blog, it probably wouldn't have opened up. So, and getting to talk to you, and now I'm on this wonderful show. I mean, how exciting is this?
And this is truly worldwide. And so people around the world are listening, not just in America and Canada and UK and Australia, but in other places as well. So people are listening, and it's a beautiful thing. I know that for me, one of the things that I'm doing with catching stories, is Simply Sarah, but also with my mom, just not videotaping, but just, and she's sharing a story, sometimes videotaping. She's getting more comfortable with that, but also just doing an audio tape of the different kinds of stories. So when you went to Kentucky to go for this reunion and to go talk with people, were you also just making mental notes of things, or were you doing more of a, let's capture this story so I can write it down later, I can be fully present? What's your...
Well, I was listening and I was taking notes. Her siblings, Missy was a change of life baby, so they're probably they were older, so they remembered different things. But there were some things, like I found out that the seamstress that I used growing up who cured my acne, because I had really bad acne for a while, and my parents took me to a dermatologist, and he wanted to put me on some tetracycline or something, which turns out is bad for your teeth. But my parents were like, oh, I don't know about that. So I went to the seamstress, and she was from, I don't know, well, she was from Nicaragua, but she told me, steam your face with manzanilla tea, which is chamomile tea. And
Yes.
I didn't have it. It got rid of all the acne and the scars. So, and then it turns out that Missy's sister, they had gone to her too, but she hadn't told them about the chamomile. I guess they didn't have acne. So anyway, it was really great.
And I think one of the things for me, it was so natural when we lived overseas to be economically empowering the people that whatever village we were in or city that we were in, finding people to economically empower. And one of the ways of doing that was to hire them at a fair wage. And so we had a cook who was there for breakfast, after breakfast, and then would prepare lunch. And then we always had our, just us for dinner, and making our own dinner, or finishing up dinner and doing our own dishes for dinner. But we also then, when we lived in the village, had somebody who would be cutting the wood to keep the, to keep the stove, because our bread, everything that we had at the house that was cooked was either cooked inside on firewood or outside on firewood. There was electricity, right? And gas bidons, what do they call it in America? What did they call them in America? The propane tanks.
Okay.
My husband is finally just, when I say bidon, he's like, I mean, the propane tank. He just is, some words are just stuck for me.
I know, me too.
Yes. And so, we would have access to those every now and then, but not all the time. And so we had somebody who did that, but also this idea of having somebody who you would go as a tailor, right? Somebody that which, if in America, if I go to a tailor, it feels a little bit different.
Right.
For some reason, there's a different feeling about that whole thing. But overseas, it was, we are economically empowering, and the time factor. And as we were growing, they measure and do all the things, and
right.
You'd come back in a week or whatever and pick up. And it was just, that was part of the cultural experience of doing that. Yes, you can have it done, but people typically do it like for wedding dresses or for suits, or, it isn't that you necessarily take your, hey, I just got a dress someplace, or I just made a dress, but I need to have somebody hem it for me, because I can't hem it, straight myself. We don't typically, at least in my world, don't hear people talking about doing that. So I love that story of you guys talking about the seamstress.
Yeah, she was wonderful. She could make everything. She could not make pants. And I think maybe it's, I was very tall for Latin America.
Yes.
I'm 5'7.25", and I've been this height, I think, since I was 12. So that it was harder to get pants. But we would go back to the States once a year and visit my grandparents, and Mom would try to estimate, like pants and stuff like that. But Doña Mercedes made the rest of our clothes, and she was so good.
Yes. So did you have this experience that my parents, when we lived way out in the bush, so this may be a different, had we lived in the city, may have been a different experience. And you guys, because of Pan America, were in the city. But I remember my dad, because it tickled so much, would have a piece of really, really thin paper, and he would take my feet and he would rub from the bottom of my foot, and then hold my foot, and then now say step. And so I'd step onto the paper with it all inked up, right? And then they would take that, let it dry, fold it up, do both feet, and send it off for them, somebody here in the States, to go take it to, bless their heart, a shoe person, to say, we need the next size of Buster Brown for this girl, and this is her size of feet. Can you help us? And then they would send us back the shoes. The Buster Brown shoes would come, and they would sure enough fit. But
we did that too. Except they didn't tickle our feet. They just had a stand and they outlined our foot. But that's what I wore Buster Browns too, because supposedly they made your feet grow well or whatever. Anyway.
Yes. We were not allowed to wear, we could wear secondhand anything else except for shoes and underwear bras, right? But when it was shoes, my parents were like, we are not going to let you have foot problems later on in life. You will wear good shoes. And so always there was an investment made into really good shoes.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. Friend, I'm looking at the time. Our time is nearly up. I just want to
Okay.
thank you so much for the gift of this, for sharing so many different parts of your story. And the audience, if you were looking for a great read, please get to the bio and find how you can get to Susan's blog, because it truly is worth all the escapades, all the listening in, and it's just delightful. Susan, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Till next
Bye.
time. Bye.